My husband mowed the lawn on a Saturday at 55 and felt fine by Sunday. He mowed the same lawn at 62 and was still sore on Wednesday. Same man, same lawn, same weight on the scale, give or take 3 pounds. So let me put the whole decade on the table before we go anywhere. Between 60 and 70, a man who isn't training loses roughly 1% of his leg muscle a year, but 3 to 4% of his leg strength. That's from the Health, Aging, and Body Composition study, and it's the single most useful sentence I know for this age window. Strength leaves about 3 times faster than mass. Meanwhile, the waist creeps at roughly a quarter to a third of an inch a year, close to 3 inches over 10 years, and the body weight can stay flat the entire time. And the obvious answer is right there: eat more protein, lift more. That's real advice. It's just not sufficient, and here is the contradiction. You can add the protein, add the training, and still slide because you are funding one side of the ledger and starving the other. So track 3 columns with me: how many days it takes you to recover from effort, inches at the navel, and seconds how long it takes you to stand up. Everything in this video lands in one of those 3. Year 0, 60, nothing hurts, that's the problem. There's no symptom to react to, because the first entry in the ledger is invisible from the outside. Tom got off the living room floor at 63 without putting a hand down, and we both took it as proof that everything was fine. It wasn't proof of anything. It was one good column while another one was already moving. The recovery column moves first, not weakness, not the mirror, just the calendar getting longer between the effort and the day you feel normal again. Saturday to Sunday becomes Saturday to Wednesday, and almost every man files that under normal aging and stops thinking about it. I'd price it differently. That extra time is the most sensitive early reading you have, and it costs nothing to notice. If the thing you did last spring now takes 3 days to clear instead of 1, something inside the fiber has changed, and there was no test we could take at home to tell us what. Here's what changed. Inside a muscle fiber, there's a maintenance crew running a recycling line. It recognizes a worn-out mitochondrion or a clump of damaged protein, wraps it in a membrane, hauls it to a lysosome, the cell's acid tank, fuses the two, breaks the junk down into amino acids and raw parts, and sends those parts back to be reused. That's autophagy, not a cleanse, not a detox, a supply chain. With age, several stations on that line get less reliable. The proteins that build the wrapper, ATG7 is the one studied most in aged muscle, show up in lower amounts. The acid tank loses some of its acidity. And the fusion step, where the wrapper meets the tank, gets less efficient. Nothing fails outright. It just becomes slow and inconsistent, which is worse because slow doesn't announce itself, so the junk stays resident. It sits inside the fiber instead of being taken apart and sent back to the parts department. Now think about what that does to a rebuild. Every time you work a muscle, you damage it a little and rebuild it. That's the whole point. But if the clearing side is running behind, you rebuild using a stockroom that's partly full of compromised parts. The muscle regenerates. It just regenerates at a lower quality. That's why the recovery column stretches. You're not weaker on Wednesday because you did too much on Saturday. You're still working through a queue. And this is the difference between having muscle and having good muscle. 2 fibers, same diameter, same look on any scan that measures size, one full of well-maintained mitochondria, one carrying a decade of undisposed material, same mass, different output. Which is exactly why the scale is about to lie to you for years. Year 4, the scale still says fine. And by fine, I mean the number he saw at 50. But I bought Tom a different belt twice in that stretch, and the scale never told me why. Because 2 things happen at once, and they cancel out on the readout. Leg lean mass drifts down about 1% a year. Fat moves inward, less under the skin on the hips and thighs, more packed around the organs. Studies tracking waist circumference through these years land near a quarter to a third of an inch a year, on average, which is roughly 3 inches across the decade, at unchanged body weight. And abdominal fat in older men is one of the strongest practical correlates of insulin resistance we have. That's an association, not a verdict on any one man, but it's a strong one. So the mirror files a false report, and the bathroom scale co-signs it. And the natural response, the one Tom had, is to decide the answer is to lose weight. It worked. That's the honest part. He lost weight, the belt went back a notch, and the second column moved in the right direction for the first time in years. And in that same season, getting out of the low chair in our den got harder. Both things were true. The weight loss was real and it was useful. But some of what left was leg muscle, and when you're already losing about 1% a year, subtracting more from that column while celebrating the waist is a trade you never consciously agreed to. This is closely tied to what Tom and I had to work through after a specialist found a brain aneurysm when he was 57. The specialist handled the aneurysm that was never ours to manage. What was ours was the fuel and the hours. We rebuilt his meal timing together over the following years, and that became the Noon Reset Protocol, his 30-day guided system for gradually shifting the eating day toward fasting until noon. The link's below the video. Now back to the chair, because the chair is where the ledger actually shows itself. The unit of account was wrong the whole time. Pounds were never the currency, function was. Go back to those health ABC numbers, because they're the ones that reorganize everything. Leg strength falling 3 to 4% a year against leg mass falling about 1. Strength going roughly 3 times faster than size, which means the arms can look essentially unchanged in the mirror for 8 years, while the staircase changes underneath you. That's the reason nothing warned him. He was watching the column that moves slowest, so the correction seems obvious. Protect the muscle, eat more protein. And at 66, that's exactly what Tom did. For months, almost nothing. His total was right, his distribution wasn't. After 60, muscle gets what researchers call anabolic resistance. It needs a louder signal to answer. A meal has to clear a threshold before muscle protein synthesis meaningfully responds, somewhere around 25 to 30 grams of protein carrying roughly 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine. Below that, the response is weak, not zero, weak. So 15 grams 4 times a day is not the same day as 30 grams twice, even though the total is identical. 4 thin plates buy you 4 half answers. 2 real ones buy you 2 full ones. And that fix creates the trap, because how do most men hit a higher protein total? They spread it. Yogurt at 7, sandwich at noon, shake at 4, meat at 7, something before bed. The building signal is now switched on from breakfast to bedtime. 14 hours of nutrients arriving. In aged muscle, mTOR complex 1, the growth coordinator that responds to amino acids and insulin, tends to stay sustained rather than cycling down. And the start order for the cleanup line runs through a protein called ULK1, which in aged muscle carries more of the inhibitory tag that keeps it from firing. The dispatch order is written, it's being held, so the crew was never fired. It's on the clock, waiting for a shift that never gets called, and it gets called least when food never stops arriving. That changes what this decade is. It stops being a story about what he lost, and becomes a story about what was never called. Every repair he'd tried until then changed the plate. Not one of them changed the span of the eating day. And now you want a number of hours. I understand. I can't give you one, honestly, and I'd rather tell you why than make one up. There is no home test for this. No strip, no wearable, no glucose reading, no ketone number tells you anything about autophagic flux. The human measurements require lab methods using inhibitors that block the final step, so you can see how much traffic was moving. When researchers did that in circulating white blood cells during a fast, flux only became detectable around the 24-hour mark. In skeletal muscle, 36 hours without food moved the regulators only modestly, and mainly in untrained men. And in 2025, a high-protein meal didn't measurably change autophagy in human blood cells 1 hour later. So anyone selling you a clock with a switch on it is ahead of the evidence. You don't chase the switch, you shorten the span, and you measure the function. Years 7 and 8, the columns start touching the day. Not dramatically, specifically. Groceries in 2 trips instead of 1. Pausing on the stairs with a bag in one hand. Taking the handrail he never used to think about. In the health and retirement study, each roughly 11-pound drop in grip strength was associated with modestly higher odds of trouble with individual independent tasks, shopping, managing medications, preparing a hot meal. Any single unit is a small effect. 10 years of them accumulating is not small. Independence isn't a mood, it's a list of physical acts, and they leave one at a time. If you want the honest version of this whole ledger in a form you can act on, Tom's guide is the 30-day version, moving the eating day toward noon, 1 step at a time, with daily explanations and simple tracking, no supplements, no calorie counting, 1 download through the link below. That's the offer. Now the year everything comes due, year 10, 70. There's a threshold here, and it's a clean one. Standing up from a chair 5 times, timed, in community-dwelling older adults, taking 10 seconds or more on that test, predicted developing new disability. 10 seconds, 5 stands, and on the timed up and go, stand, walk about 10 feet, turn, come back. Around 12 seconds is the standard fall risk screening cutoff. Tom braced on the car door, getting out in a parking lot that year. That was the whole event. That was 10 years of ledger entries arriving in one motion. Now do the arithmetic on two men, both 70, both the same weight. One takes 8 seconds out of a low seat, the other takes 16. The scale cannot distinguish them. The insurance chart cannot distinguish them. Their next 10 years are not the same decade, and the microscope agrees with the parking lot. In the study of muscle mobility and aging, autophagy gene expression measured in the muscle of older adults tracked with their physical performance, their muscle volume, and their mitochondrial function. That's an association, not proof of cause. But it's the first time in this story the inside of the cell and the outside of the body say the same thing. So run the decade again with one variable changed. Not the food, the hours. The first human trial to actually measure it found autophagic flux higher after 6 months of intermittent time-restricted eating compared with standard care. That was exploratory in adults with obesity, and the time scale is what matters, months, not an afternoon. Separately, an eating window from noon to 8, combined with aerobic and resistance training, reduced fat mass and increased lean mass in inactive adults with overweight or obesity. And across the trials so far, time-restricted eating with adequate protein doesn't appear to cost skeletal muscle relative to ordinary calorie restriction. That's not a cure, and I won't sell it as one. It's a different slope. If explanations that keep both the science and your actual life intact are useful to you, subscribing helps. I'm glad you're here. So here's the operating shape. The eating day opens at noon and closes in the evening. That's the boundary. The clearing side finally gets an unfunded stretch it can work in. And inside that window, you load, not sprinkle. For a man in this decade who's training or losing ground, roughly 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which is the upper band of the Protige and ESPEN position ranges for older adults, delivered in 2 or 3 real doses that each clear that 25 to 30 gram threshold. The span protects the clearing, the loading protects the building. Neither works alone. That's the entire lesson of the 10 years. The morning that imaging report came back, we sat at the kitchen table and understood 2 things. We could not change the diagnosis, and the specialists were the ones who'd manage it. What was ours were the hours and the fuel. So we changed those, together, for him. 10 years later, his 3 columns read differently. Recovery from a heavy Saturday is a day, not 4. His belt hasn't moved in 6 years, and he gets out of the same den chair without the arms, which leaves you with 3 measurements you can take this week without buying anything. 1. How many days after real effort before you feel normal? 2. A tape measure at the navel, first thing, same day every month. 3. Sit, stand 5 times, timed, and know that 10 seconds is the number that predicted trouble ahead in older adults. Because the belt and the chair were never separate stories. One of them was always the receipt for the other.